Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai Perek Hey Halacha Aleph. We just finished learning the Mishnah yesterday. We will start today. We're going to learn Daf Mem, but we're going to start on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis all the way towards the end and the beginning of the Gemara. Let's quickly review the din of the Mishnah. That when a person buys bread from a baker, and now this person, the Chavir, that's what the Mishnah is speaking about, has to separate Trumas Meiser, and in addition to the regular Demai separations, Challah. Now, why wouldn't the baker himself separate the Challah? We'll get to today. We're going to remind ourselves that we really spoke about this topic on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. I know that my son, right, Rabbi Mendel spoke about, is the baker a Yam Ha'aretz? It sounds that way, right? Because if the baker would be a chaver, then whoever buys the bread from the baker should not have to have any worries, not of the mai nor of challah. But we're going to get back to this today. But the case of the Mishnah, without getting into whether the baker is a chaver, whether the baker is an Ha'aretz, Mishnah says that the buyer has to separate Trumas Meiser and challah. The Mishnah gave a formula of how this is done, after which he separates or he designates the Meiser Sheni and he redeems it. And as we said in the Mishnah, he makes a mark. He has to mark on the bread an area that separates 3+% from all of the rest. Why 3+%? So we explained, because the first separation will be Trumas Meiser. Trumas Meiser is really 1%. Another detail that we spoke out, that you can't go from the produce and separate 1%. It doesn't work that way. Trumas Meiser is not 1% from what you have. Trumas Meiser is 10% from the 10% that you separated for the Levi. It's Meiser min ha-Meiser. Now, even though you don't have to give the Meiser addition to a Levi, but you have to designate Meiser addition in order for you to be able to separate the Trumas Meiser. So you make this mark that covers an area of 3% and a bit. One of that is Meiser, Trumas Meiser. And you have to say that I'm separating from this mark 1% and 9 other percents near it. That means 10% Meiser addition. From it, I'm separating the 1%, which is the Trumas Meiser. That's the first thing that you declare. Then you explain that what's the remaining part in that marked area. Now, a baker has to separate 1/48 for challah, even though the buyer is the one doing the separation. But as we spoke out yesterday, since what triggers the obligation is the making of the dough, and the baker is the one that made the dough, you bought the bread from the baker, but the baker is the one that made it, so the percent is the percent of anachton, which is 1/48, a bit more than 2%. So then you're saying the bit more than 2%, 2% plus is for challah, and then you deal with the Meiser Sheni. That is what we learned yesterday. Now, if you think about it, what the Mishnah is implying by the fact that first Meiser Rishon and Trumas Meiser is designated, and only then is Challah designated. What we accomplish by doing it in that order is that we're making sure that Meiser is removed even from the Challah section. In other words, if the Challah from this dough would be something that you have to remove, but the Challah itself is not included in the din of the Mai, which is really what we learned. That will be the opening question of the Gemara. If Chalas Am Ha'aretz is exempt of the Mai, which the Mishnah said before it is on Daf Zayin, then you would not first separate Meiser Rishon / Trumas Meiser and then separate Challah. You wouldn't do it in that order. Doing it in that order is only in order to accomplish that the Challah that you will later separate is already Kaiv, is already Mesuken from Meiser Rishon / Trumas Meiser. Problem that the Gemara is going to open up today's shir is that we learned, as we mentioned on Daf Zayin, we learned in the first chapter of Masechtas Demai that Chalas of Demai, the Chala of Demai itself is completely exempt from all of the Demai separations. Chalas HaMa'aretz is Peturim in Demai. that will be a problem. And we're going to spend the whole daf. I know it's not such a large daf, but we're going to spend today's daf going into tomorrow's daf, God willing, to resolve this problem, this apparent contradiction. We're going to review a sugya that we had on Daf Zayin, a machlokes Rab Oishia and Rab Yechanan. And the Rambam, when he writes in the beginning of Sefer Yad that the Yerushalmi was compiled by Rab Yechanan, today will be a classic example where you see that's the case. Because the whole premise of the kasha, as I'll explain, is only if we learn Daf Zayin the way Rabbi Yechanan learns it. According to the way that Rabbi Oishaya explains the rule that chalas ha'ma'aretz is paturim and adamai, b'chlal there's no kasha over here. But indeed, the Yerushalmi was compiled by Rabbi Yechanan, so lishi tasa you have a contradiction. The Gemara is going to be machadish that there is a shita of Beis Shammai that we don't have here. We didn't learn about Beis Shammai yet. The Mishnah that we quoted before on Daf Zayin only quotes the opinion of Beis Hillel, which is the norm. Right, Beis Shammai, the Mark and Beis Hillel is not even a Mishnah. I know that sometimes the Mishnah quotes both opinions, but it's b'chlal not a problem when Rabbeinu HaKadosh is soisim ke Beis Hillel. But there is a shita of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai will hold that chalas am ha'aretz is chayiv and demai, and that will be the Gemara solution that we're going to focus on today, that we're going to continue tomorrow, that our Mishnah must follow the shita of Beis Shammai. It sounds like a simple answer, but as we will see, it will not be a simple answer because there is another issue that we have to take into account. And I know that Kevin just threw it up there. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. And that is based on this presumption that the baker is a Am Ha'aretz, aside of the Damai issues, an Am Ha'aretz is not, he's Tameh. Chala, that's Tameh, may not be consumed. And that's going to open up another whole can of worms. So even though the remaining of the dough, I bought the bread, I'm allowed to eat bread that's tamei, but the challah part is not designated for eating. That is another reason why it should be exempt completely from the my separations. Another sugya that we learned above. That's something that we'll have to focus on. So then we're going to get into maybe the dough was made with mei peiros. And we're going to now go into another machlokes tanoim. If you make a dough with apple juice, is it b'chlal chayiv to have challah separated from it? The chiyuv of challah is only if you have a minimum amount of dough. Halacha l'maisa now is, we say that by Chabad and many others, less than 2.5 pounds, you don't even separate challah. Between 2.5 and 5 pounds, some people go 2.5, 4 pounds, you separate, you don't make a bracha. But if it's less than 2.5 pounds, you don't have challah. Now, if you make flour, if you mix challah, you make a dough out of one of the non-7 liquids, non-7 halachic liquid, there's a machlokes tanoim. Some hold that halachically it's not even considered a dough; it's not considered connected. That will be if someone whose tummy touches one part of the dough, will the whole dough become tummy? If we can see it as one block, yeah. And not there's a machlokes about it. So that will be another topic that we'll get into. And finally, we're going to now learn what you mentioned, the Rabbi Mendel, that on Daf Chaf Aleph on the base, there was another problem that the Gemara had. The Gemara over there, Daf Chaf Aleph in our pagination, brought our topic. The Mishnah over there clearly says that the baker has to separate challah. Here we're saying that the buyer separates challah. There we had an answer between Rabbi Oishia and Rabbi Lazar. And really, as we'll speak out when we learn it inside, not everyone agrees that our Mishnah is speaking about a baker that's an Am Ha'aretz. According to Rabbi Yechanan, our Mishnah is speaking about a baker who is an Am Ha'aretz. According to Rabbi Lazar, our Mishnah here is also speaking about a baker that's a chaver. Now, by the way, we're going to repeat, if the baker is an Am Ha'aretz, so then he's tamei. That's not necessarily the case. Many bakers that were Amaratzim, what they would do, this is for their business, is that they would hire a chaver to knead the dough for them. So buyers, even the Yisraelim, if they had this higher standard of eating chulin, betara, there's many levels. It doesn't have to be betaras hakodesh, just betara, betaras truma, betaras hakodesh, or just betara. They would be able to buy it from them. All of that, in other words, many topics that we learned, beikar on Daf Zayin and on Daf Chaf Aleph, will be brought back to our sugya. And just repeating, before we go inside, look inside the Rashi Elyon on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, 6 lines before the bottom on the left column. So it's the fact that the Mishnah make sure that the Seder of the Hafrashas, Trumas Maisid, and Chala and Maisid Sheni is the way we mentioned. First Maisid Ishan, Trumas Maisid, then Chala. What does that accomplish? That accomplishes is that by the time you come to the Chala, all of what you have is already Mesukin from Maisid Ishan and from Trumas Maisid, which implies that Chala of Chala Sama'aretz is Chayev B'Damai. Because if our Mishnah would hold that Chalas Ama'aretz, the Chala part, only is completely exempted from the Gzeira of the Mai, separate Chala first. Look inside the Rashi earlier. Hashar Chala, again, the left column, the Flametesim is based on the left column, 6 lines from the bottom. So according to our Mishnah, Afilu Hachala Atzma, since you resolve Ma'aseh Rishon and Trumas Ma'aseh first, Chala only came second. By the time you came to the Chala, all of what you have, which is the 99%, is Mesuken. Achfilo HaChala Atzma Yi Mesukenes Umeuseres Mi Ma'aseh V'Trumas Ma'aseh.
Why don't we do it after Ma'aseh Sheni?
That's a good kasha. So why do we do it after Ma'aseh Sheni? Huh?
It's not all the time, but you have Ma'aseh Sheni.
No. In other words, like Mimanav Shach, if our Mishnah holds that Chala has to be Mesuken from the Mai obligates you also to resolve Ma'aseh Sheni. Kasha, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we'll see that tomorrow, or maybe I'm going to look later. Maybe it's somewhere in the Noisa Kane. But we're focusing on the fact that Chala comes second, not number one. So it says the Gemara, let's start, guys, Daf Lamed Tesam Beis. By the order of the Mishnah, meaning Ma'aseh is removed first. Kumtois, that, the Yerushalmi, so Bekitz said, Af Alachala. You know what? Look in the Mahara folder, the last Mahara folder. Af Alachala. It's the fact that you say Echad Mimeya Mimashi Yeshkan Mashma Mikoil Mashi Yeshkan Sha'af on that which you Af Alachala Ka'ama. Because another way of learning it, let me just go back. When you make a mark, how much is in that marked area? A little bit more than 3%. For that cheshbon to be accurate, which it is, it's only because the Ma'aseh, Trumas Ma'aseh is 1% on everything, including on the Chala. It's 1% from everything. Now, Daf Mem, why is that so? The Chala, Chayeves, B'Damai, V'loi Chen Tanina, did we not learn, Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel, and we're using our Dafim on Daf Zayin, the Mishnah says, and that's a Stam Mishnah, Chalas Am Ha'aretz. The Mishnah gave a second case. The case was Meduma. Guys, just to know what Meduma means, we just learned this in the Rambam. For people who are learning the 3 chapters of the Rambam, that and Am Ha'aretz, we said they all removed Truma Gedoyla. The Am Ha'aretz removed Truma Gedoyla. The Truma Gedoyla fell back into his chulin. You did not have the ratio that's needed of 100 to 1. There was less than that ratio. So therefore, it's not batul. When it's batul, what do? You remove whatever amount of truma fell in, and you give it to a kohen, and the rest you eat, you the owner. But if it's meduma, the owner cannot eat any of it. The owner is chayiv to sell all of it to a kohen. Okay, hold on. Now the kohen bought it. Now what? The kohen bought it from an Ama'aretz. So the Mishnah says that when a kohen buys meduma from an Ama'aretz, the kohen is not obligated to remove any of the demai separations. That's the Mishnah before. The meduma part is not negate to our sugya, but the chalas ha'ma'aretz is negate. So the Mishnah says chalas ha'ma'aretz meduma p'turim and ademai has to a lady. Why would you have to separate ma'aser rishon and trumas ma'aser and have the ma'aser rishons 1% be from all of the rest, including the chala? When chala, the chala part of this should not be chayv in any tidings. That's like it's a statement. And the Gemara is going to give a big chiddush. First of all, it's not just new information, which is not a big chiddush. Just when you know it, you know it. But for us to go ahead and to say that our Mishnah follows Beis Shammai is a huge chiddush, and mamish means there's no other way. So our answer is that Ravach, and this is really in the name of Rabbi Bun Bar Chia, B'Shem Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina. They say that there's no option, that our Mishnah follows the sheet of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai argues with the Mishnah that we had on Daf Zayin. Beis Shammai holds that chala from an Ama'aretz is subject to the Mai. You know what I mean, Vlad? It means let's say we're speaking about, like I mentioned, even if a guy's an Amoritz, so there's a Tuma issue. Many Amaratzim bakers, they would hire the Mashgiach, they would hire the Chavod, who's someone who's trustworthy, that he's pure, and they would knead the dough. So the baker's making the business, but and he would sell bread that starved. That kneader would separate the challah on behalf of the owner, and whichever kohen got it, Beis Shammai holds when the kohen gets challah, the kohen cannot eat the challah. You get it? The kohen first has to deal with the demai separations. Now, we never had such a thing mentioned before. On Daf Zayin, the Mishnah didn't even bring two opinions. So V'tonichein, so B'Shem Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, he had a brayso, and this is the brayso that Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, Amar Mishum Rab Shimon, that's a Shimon by Yochai, that when it comes to challah, Beis Shammai mechayven, Beis Hillel are poitrin. Okay, at least we have a source now to go ahead and to say, look how much Rebbe on Perek Aleph didn't even quote this brayso. He only quotes one opinion, which is the opinion of Beis Hillel. Rabbi writes, Chalas ha'ma'aretz, v'hamaduma p'turim en adamai. But our Mishnah, the way, this detail only follows Beis Shammai. Now, once you can swallow this answer, because there's no other, we don't have another answer, that it won't be enough. And the Gemara is going to go back and forth a few times today and to continue tomorrow, that even Beis Shammai, it's not so simple. Let's go one step at a time. Says the Gemara, hold on. Klum amru Beis Shammai el davar shehu lizriya. Now I know that that's the words that we have over here, but as you can see, both in the Shinu Neschois, and he goes from doime lizriya. What does doime lizriya mean? Right? So we're going to go with the Gra. The Gra actually says la achila, and we're going to learn today the Gra's pshat in the Gemara. It's very complicated learning the other pshatim, and it's let's say in Daf Hayomi style. Sometimes it's better just to learn one approach. So we're going to read the words la achila. So klum amru Beis Shammai elo davar shehu la achila, not the lashon bitniya. Even Beis Shammai that argues with Beis Hillel, when does Beis Shammai hold that challah ha'ma'aretz is chayiv in the mai if the challah was separated for it to be consumed? Even Beis Shammai is moida that when the challah ha'ma'aretz is not bought to be eaten by a person, let's read the Gemara inside, ilu halokeyach, if someone bought not the chayim, I bought for ha'ma'aretz something that also has to be challah. The whole thing I bought, either lezera or lebehema, right? This is a Mishnah we had above, or kemach leoides, or shemen leneid, which is, by the way, part of the Mishnah that we quoted above. That chalas hamadas amadum of tunim and adamai. The beginning of that Mishnah was all other exemptions of the mai, and some of them was that if any product was not bought la'achila, it's excluded from the gzeira of the mai. There we don't have a brayse that Beis Shammai is machai. Shema einoi pater midamai. It's not true. Of course, that unless you find a brayse or otherwise, which we don't have, Beis Shammai will agree with that part of the Mishnah. Now, the guy that bought bread from a baker. Now I'm going to just speak out. Now we're going now with the presumption, like you said yesterday, that the baker is an Amoritz. We're going with the presumption that he needed the dough, which means anachanami. We're going with the presumption that the dough was bought by someone who eats tamidika food, which is absolutely halachically okay. But don't forget that just because the food will be eaten, betuma, the challah part of it, which is tameh, which has to be given to a kohen, the kohen cannot consume it. So that is something which is like lezera, like lebehema. And that, by the way, that now you understand the shin and the schos that he says, doime, it's doime lezriya. Because we're not planting it. The guy, you know what the kohen will do with it? He'll use it for fuel. So the problem is, even if we hold like Beis Shammai, even let's go, chalas ha'ma'aretz is chayiv in the mai. Even Beis Shammai, you know when chalas ha'ma'aretz is chayiv in the mai if the kohen is going to eat it, In our Mishnah, the kohen may not eat it. Why may the kohen not eat it? We're going with the presumption because it's tamei. Who told you it's tamei? Because the Gemara is beginning, Mendel, like you said yesterday, with the presumption that okay. Now I want to say like this. First of all, I want to read the Ksav Yad. Look inside the right. There's Ksav Yad Aleph, Ksav Yad Beis, the left column. Elul davar shul achila. The Beishamai mechayiv demai b'chala. And al karchach, even that chiddush is einoi ela kishachala royal achila. Only if you can eat it. Because the ibishein royal achila, if it's inedible, then holy palik Beishamai. On the earlier part in the Mishnah and Daf Zayin, that what or the Mishnah writes, she put him in the mind. Now, hi, chala, bami de amaretz. Who told you that? That's the presumption. I'll tell you why do we having that presumption? We're going to challenge that soon. Why are we having that presumption? Because if the baker is a chaver, why do you have to separate anything? Right? If the baker is a chaver, why do you have to separate trumas meiser? Why? That's the whole thing is about an amaretz. The problem with the amaretz is that not only is the amaretz not neman ala meisres, he's not tahor, he's tamei. The problem is virtois the grav chala tmeya asura bachila. Have a kiloi keyach lisriv ala behema. But in the mai afilu lebeishamai. Now I want to say like this that. Why is chalas hamaretz pturim in adamai? I just want you to know. Why does the Mishnah say, which is Beis Hillel, why is chalas hamaretz pturim in adamai? What's the logic? And we had on that test on Beis Hillel ptura. Why would chalas hamaretz be ptura? The way we paskin, there's a machlekes on that test on the base between Rabbi Oishia and Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Oishia, according to Rabbi Oishia, when the Am Ha'aretz is going to be separating the challah, even though he doesn't separate, let's say, Trumas Meiser, the Am Ha'aretz separates Truma Gedoyla. So just like the Am Ha'aretz separates Truma Gedoyla, so there's a presumption that the Am Ha'aretz separates challah.
Is it also
yes, it's like Truma.
You read about this.
According to Rabbi Oishia, whenever an Am Ha'aretz is not separating challah, which is the case of our Mishnah, the proof is the buyer has to separate the challah. Then this whole rule that chalas Am Ha'aretz is paturim and hadamai is irrelevant. Just want to point that out. According to Rabbi Oishia, there's b'chlal marakash. According to Rabbi Oishia, our Mishnah can be Beis Hillel. When do we say chalas Am Ha'aretz is paturim and hadamai? When the Am Ha'aretz himself was mafresh the challah. Whenever the Am Ha'aretz is not dealing with the challah, who's dealing with the challah? The guy that bought it. When you learn the Mishnah, again, I'm going to challenge this at the end of today's daf, but the presumption is the baker is an Am Ha'aretz. What's my proof? The fact that you, the buyer, you have to separate everything. And the buyer is a chaver. According to Rabbi Oishia, when do we say chalas Am Ha'aretz is pturim and adamai? Only when the Am Ha'aretz, when the Am Ha'aretz is the one that separated the challah. Here we're speaking about that the buyer separated the challah. Just to make it clear, it's only Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the rule. Chalas Am Ha'aretz pturim and adamai. Rabbi Yochanan says that there is no exception. The whole damai is only with the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan never made it on challah. Then there's no difference between whether the Am Ha'aretz separated, whether the buyer separated. And again, like we mentioned in the introduction, that will be a good example of where you see that the compiler of Yerushalmi was Rabbi Yochanan. And it's a big doichik to say that our Mishnah follows Beis Shammai. Who does that? And now we have to find the Baraisa. But Rabbi Yochanan is the one that put it together. Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of Chalas Am Ha'aretz has nothing to do with who's the one that's separating it. That's the problem. And the solution is, our Mishnah is Beis Shammai. The Gemara says it's not enough of a solution. Because we're going now with the presumption that the Mishnah's bread is tamei. So even though the remaining 96+% will be eaten betuma, But the challah that you separated, and by the way, the trumas meiser that you separated for the kohen cannot be eaten by the kohen because it's tamei, it's tamei. So now we're back to the kasha. Even lebei Shammai, if you buy challah not for consumption, not just challah, any product, when you buy it from a am haaretz, something not for human consumption, there is no decree of the might to begin with. So the kasha comes back.
Everybody agrees on that?
Everyone agrees on that, even Beis Shammai. So look how far we have to push. So now we must say, saying the Mishnah's Beis Shammai is one type of chiddush. Now we're going to really qualify the Mishnah. It must be that what type of bread is our Mishnah talking about? A bread that was needed not with the 7 liquids. The 7 halachic liquids could be remembered by the mnemonic Yad, Shachad, Dam. Yayin, Yad, Dalit is Dvash. Dvash here is bees honey, not the honey of the fig's honey. And it's always chalav Dvash. Then you have Shachat, the Shemen, Chalav, Tal, and Dam, Dalit Mem is Dam and Mayim. If you use any one of those 7 liquids, then after those 7 liquids had contact with something that grew from the ground and is now disconnected to the ground, which would include flour, now it is susceptible to becoming tamei. And the Amoaretz, who has a default status of tamei, when he touches the dough that he needed, he makes a tamei. If you're going to need flour with liquids not of these 7, so then it never became susceptible to becoming tamei, even though the Amoaretz is tamei, but the product, the bread, is not tamei. So that we must say that. So number one, the Mishnah follows Beis Shammai. The kasha is the challah part, which is for the kohen, cannot be consumed. So that is also excluded from the laws of the Mai. So the Mishnah says no, the challah part the kohen will eat. It's made for eating. It's not tamei. The amoaretz is tamei. No, b'megabel lisasi b'mei pedis. Why would people do it even nowadays? I'm not going into the authenticity of it. And again, the Zionis are Amoitzi. The reason why we would be familiar with Mei Pedis would be Mizoinis. It would be I don't know. It would be when Pesach falls out, Erev Shabbos falls out on. When Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. So what do you do for Lechem Mishnah? Not a problem. Can't eat bread for Shalosh Shudas before you eat it and you get rid of it. Can't eat bread because you now eat bread midoraisa afternoon. Can't eat matzah, even though we have a minhag, we don't eat matzah for 30 days, but halachically you may not eat matzah from the morning. So what will be the solution? Matzah ashira. Another example. Matzah ashira means that you made matzah out of mei pedis. Okay, the kid said that must be the case. Problem is, who told you that dough? Who told you that dough that's made with mei pedis is obligated to challah to begin with? And that's really, like we mentioned in the introduction, a machloikas tanoim. That's very good to remember. Now, the Mishnah that has this topic, it's a Mishnah on challah, is not focusing on whether there is a chiyuv of challah. That is an automatic outcome. The Mishnah wants to know the following. When someone is tamei and you impart tumah, so we know how it works. It normally goes down a notch. So let's say if I'm tamei and I touch this, I'm tamei tamei mace, which is an av. If I touch this, what does this become? Can a keli become a rishon? Midoiraisa? Yes. What happens if this keli touches food? What does the food become? A shane. It goes down. So think about it. If you have flour, not a dough, flour. Flour is grains. Someone who's tamei, the example the Mishnah is talking about over there in challah is someone who's a tful yoim. At a tful yoim, even though he went to the mikvah prior to the stars coming out, he has a level of tumah. If he touches flour, a flour that became susceptible because the grains got wet, so only that which he touched becomes tamei, because we view the next grains of flour as to be a separate entity. So it's like A touching B, B touching C. It's not matame. Question is, what happens if you needed flour with meipetes? So there's a machlekes tanoim whether you view it as one piece of food, Like if I touch a piece of bread, someone who's tummy, the whole bread becomes a rishon. The whole bread. I don't say, what my finger touched is a rishon. The next millimeter is a sheni. You don't do that. If food is considered one, then it all becomes tummy together. So how do you view dough that was touched by a tful yoin? And the fact that there's a machlekes tanoim, and das rabbin, the chachamim, not das yachar, holds that only the part that was touched by the tful yoin becomes tummy. That's because that the majority opinion is that it's not viewed as one blob. And therefore, if it's not one blob, why would you be chayiv and challah when there is a minimum amount of dough that's machayiv you to separate challah? If halachically it's not considered oneness because it wasn't made, then there's no chiyuv of challah. The fact that you're separating challah means it was water. So we're back to the kasha. If it's water, water means, and the guy who made it is an amaretz. That's a presumption now. So it's tamei. And if it's tamei, I don't care that it's beishamei. I'm back to the kasha. Let's read it inside.
Separate. How do you separate a plot?
You don't. In other words, according to the chachamim,
that's not a crucial argument. You can't.
What do you mean? You don't separate challah.
Right.
You don't separate. You're not chayiv to separate challah. You don't have to share. I have 20 pounds of a dough. Halachically, it's not a dough. It's not connected.
A blob, as you just said.
It's a blob. Halachically, it's considered dispersed things stuck together. If you walk into sometimes the couple is a couple, the shidduch is a shidduch, and sometimes it's two people, they're living under the same roof, but they're not one. All right. That this opinion, that a dough that's needed, b'mei peiros, is considered a dough that is chayiv and challah, that is only following the das yachid of Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda ish bar Toisa. And again, he only speaks about the dinim of Tuma. He argues, this Rabbi Elazar, that if a tful yoin touches that dough, all of it becomes tamei, which implies it's considered a unit. It's a unit. The chachamim who argue with him obviously hold that it's not a unit, which means chaker abanon loy. Okay, very good. So Vaita Chala should have been exempt from the Demai tidings, even if you go according to Rabbi Yechanan. That's the problem. Now, the reason why the Gemara was hesitating to say what it will say, and we'll leave with that today, is because let's focus on one other topic we learned in the second chapter, on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. There, the Mishnah was speaking about who has to separate challah, who doesn't have to separate challah. If you remember, there was a Mishnah that says that wholesalers don't have to separate. The mai. Wholesalers don't separate the mai. The Mishnah gave three categories. We also spoke about a baker. The Mishnah taught a din based on the rule, implying that the baker is the one that's chayv to do all of the separations. That's what the Mishnah says in the second chapter. The Gemara over there brought our Mishnah, the opening of Perek Chamishi, by asking a contradiction. Second chapter, mashma, the baker is chayiv to do the separations. The Mishnah over here is saying that the buyer is doing all the separations. Side the demai, side the challah. When we learned the Gemara, we said that really the Gemara could have answered. Tell you the difference. Perek Beis, the baker is a chaver. Perek Chamishi, the baker is an amaretz. We don't trust the amaretz. The reason why the Gemara, we said, did not give that answer is because since the Mishnah uses the word nachtoim consistently, Rabbeinu HaKadosh is going to use a word if they're all the same. Rabbi in the same Masechta is not going to say the same word and mean it. Nachtom here is a chaver, nachtom there is an amaretz. So they wanted to make it consistent. And the Gemara over there gave two answers to that. One answer was Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan holds that the Mishnah over there is speaking about a baker who is an amaretz, but a baker who are amaretz and they want to do business, and knowing that if they would need the dough, less people will buy it. Some people wouldn't eat anything that was made b'tumah, so they would hire a kneader who's a chaver. 1 second. And the moment the kneader, the chaver, kneaded the dough, everyone understands that since the owner himself is an amaretz and a stamei, it's to the advantage of the business for all of the separations to happen sooner than later, because there is trumas meiser under the roof of the baker who's the amaretz. You have challah under the roof of the owner. If he'll touch it, he'll make a tamei. It's whenever you made the dough betahara We want for the separations to happen sooner rather than later. Everyone wants it. For it not to become Tomei. That's the second. That's what Rabbi Yechon says. That's why over there, the baker is chayiv to do the separations. He doesn't do it himself. He doesn't touch it. But he is the one who makes sure it happens when he still owns it. Our Mishnah is speaking about a case. That's what Rabbi Yechanan answers, that there was no chaver baker. The Amaretz was a baker. Which, by the way, what does that mean? That the dough was tamei. That will be the kasha. And once the Amaretz is the one that's doing it, that's Rabbi Yechanan's answer. Yeah, Mendel. Of course, the baker should separate everything, but the Amaretz doesn't. So when you buy it from the Amaretz, you have a problem. You got to separate the demai separations. That's why, de facto, when you buy anything from an Amaretz, you're chayv to separate the demai. That's Rabbi Yechanan's answer. The kasha, the reason why we got stuck is because Rabbi Yechanan compiled it. Don't forget, if it would be according to Rabbi Ishia, the whole kasha is not a kasha. The whole thing is Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan and L'shitasi got stuck. Here, Rabbi Yechanan is going to have to say, just like this Mishnah goes according to Beishamai, that this din only goes according to Rabbi Elazar. Now, what Rabbi Elazar said, guys, on Daf Chaf Aleph from his base, the way he reconciled the contradiction. What's the contradiction? There, the Mishnah is saying that the baker has to separate everything. Here, the Mishnah is predicated on the buyer separating everything. He says that our Mishnah could even be speaking about a baker who's a chaver. The Mishnah there can be speaking about a baker who's a chaver. Question is, who's chayv to do the separation? So he links it to what we learned in the second chapter, that generally someone who is a wholesaler, especially when it came to selling basic staple foods, where the government then, because of there being on one hand laws of competition, if you had a bakery in America, I can open up a bakery across the street. It didn't work that way. You had a certain monopoly, but to counter inflation, the government would limit your prices. And wholesalers were not able to sell for a large amount of money. They barely made profit, if you remember that whole topic. So whenever you're selling a product that barely has profit, in order for you to make a living, they threw the demai obligations on the buyer. And that will be the case over here. That we're speaking about a chaver. The guy is a chaver. Why is the buyer chayiv? Because the baker is a chaver. The baker brought the produce from a farmer who's an Amaretz. So he bought flour that is demai. He doesn't have to do anything. But if that would be the case, then the dough is not tamei. He's a chaver. And lib beishamai, chalas, the challah also has to be a challah from, don't forget, challah is from produce you brought from a farmer. The farmer was an Amaretz. That the my separations has to even go on the challah. That will be the answer that we're going to leave today. Let's read it inside. So Elon says the Gemara, look at Rabbi Yechanan. No, it's not only do we have to say ambitions like Beishamai, but we won't learn pshat like Rabbi Yechanan and Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis, who insists that our Mishnah is speaking about a baker Amaretz who didn't even get a kneader, which means the dough was tummy that it wouldn't work. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, Rabbi Yechanan says that in the second chapter, why is the baker the one going to be separating it? Rabbi Yechanan says he's an Amaretz. He's an Amaretz. You know why he'll separate everything? Because he hired a kneader to make it betara. He knows that it's under his roof. He knows that if he won't separate things quickly, he will inevitably make a tummy. That's why the baker does it. Khan over here, meaning in the 5th chapter, bottom line is Rabbi Yechanan learned the Mishnah the way you were learning it by default. We're speaking about an Amaretz, because if the baker is not an Amaretz, why would it be demai? And all of that brings us to a checkmate. We must say that our Mishnah will be understood the way Rabbi Elazar explained it on Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. That Rabbi Elazar oimer kan v'kan ba'oise b'tahara. The Mishnah in Perek Beis, the Mishnah in Perek K is not speaking about an Amaretz. So again, you can ask, if you're not an Amaretz, what's the issue? The issue is that the baker is not the farmer. The baker bought a product. He brought the grain or flour from a Amaretz, which means the raw material has to be the my type. Not only that, when he makes the dough, you have to separate challah. But we learned, Rabbi Elazar explained, that whenever the wholesaler, a baker could be a wholesaler. You can have a little baker a little retailer, and you can have someone who's selling, we learn, mida gasa, mida daka. Whatever the mida Mishnah says, once you're selling in large quantities, and you have these restrictions of how much profit you can make, there's so little profit that if you, the baker, you'll have to separate the demai separations. If you're going to have to do the challah, you won't make a living. So the Chachamim said, as an exception, normally tevel is on the seller, that here it's on the buyer. That will be the answer. Kan v'kan b'oiseh means that the baker is a chavet. And now we still need to have Beis Shammai. Why do we have to have Beis Shammai? I want to make it clear. Because the chaver, the baker, bought the grain from a farmer. The farmer's grain is demai. According to Beis Hillel, according to the Stam Mishnah and the Yad and Daf Zayin, the mai doesn't have to have a challah of the mai, doesn't have to have the demai separation separated. According to that, you know what the seder would be? First, you separate challah, and then you separate from the remaining trumas ma'aser. Our Mishnah, no, ma'aser rishon first, which means that we're doing that to cover the challah, because we follow Beis Shammai, so we're leaving off that it follows Beis Shammai, and one doichik and the other doichik, Rabbi Yechanan has to concede that it only works if now you incorporate the understanding of the Amoyda Rabbi Lazar. That our Mishnah is talking about a chaver, l'chaim blood.
This really tells us
that's telling you. Okay.
you
Yes.
can't buy anything from an Amar that could potentially tummy.
Hold on. Of course you could.
Well,
No.
I mean, for consumption.
1 second. I say it again. Ami Yisrael. I could, because I don't have to eat my bread when the bread is starved. The bread could be tummy. There were people that took a stringency only to eat food that's starved. But if it's not, they would eat it. But the challah is different. The challah of it is different. Because the challah goes to the kohen. A kohen, you cannot eat. If the challah is tummy, why don't I give you challah today? Because it's tummy. We burn it. There's nothing you can do with it. That's different. No, the challah part is checkmated. The rest of the food could be eaten. So you get all these details in this.
All right.
Tomorrow we have also a small daf. Maybe we'll begin.